study mode.
Hey everyone, this is Matt from Island Press in Washington, D.C., and welcome everyone to the Global Street Design Guide webinar. This is actually the first of two sessions we're doing today, and we're highlighting the new Global Street Design Guide, and I'm glad you could all join us. We're happy to have Untitled Chapter and Fabrizio Prati as our moderators today. They're going to be sharing the moderating duties, and we'll hear from them shortly. And after that, we're going to hear from Skye Duncan, who is GDCI's director. She'll go over the ins and outs of the new guide, and we'll also have two great case studies from the guide, one from Copenhagen and the other focused on Buenos Aires. So we will hear about those more in just a second. But first, I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in, and I want to thank all of the partners who helped put this event on. So many thanks again to the Global Designing Cities Initiative, GDCI, and everyone at NACTO. And thanks very much to Bloomberg Philanthropies for all their support. And of course, thanks to all my colleagues here at Island Press. Okay, and here's a quick look at the agenda for today. First, I'll introduce today's moderators, Ankita and Fabrizio, and they'll say a few words about the design guide, and then they will introduce Skye Duncan, who's going to give a more in-depth presentation on the guide, and that will be about 15 or 20 minutes. After that, we'll learn about the two case studies from the guide. We'll hear from Juanjo Mendez, Secretary of Transportation for the City of Buenos Aires, and we'll also hear from Andreas Roll from Gale Architects. He'll be talking about a project in Copenhagen. After that, the four speakers will have a discussion about the guide. That'll last about 15 minutes or so, and they'll talk about why the guide is important in this, of course, this increasingly urbanized global society. And we'll want to incorporate your questions into the discussion, so please feel free to submit questions via GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to get to them during the Q&A. And also keep in mind that I will send out a link to today's recording, and that will go out in the next day or two. So if you've missed something, it'll be posted shortly, so don't worry about that. Also, I just want to call quick attention to the Island Press Urban Resilience Project. We set up this project with help from the Kresge Foundation and the JPB Foundation, and basically just to raise awareness of issues that lie at the intersection of climate change, urbanism, and equity. So the way it works is we just publish original content, mostly short-form pieces, blog posts in different media outlets like Grist and The Root and Guardian and lots of others. So if you're interested in learning more, please follow us on social media, visit us at islandpress.org/URP, or send a note to the email address on the screen. Also keep in mind that you can get a copy of the Global Street Design Guide for 20% off. Just go to islandpress.org and use the promo code 2NACTO. Okay, so I would like to just now kick things off. I want to introduce today's moderators, Untitled Chapter and Fabrizio Prati. Ankita is an urban designer for the plan. She worked at the planning studio at Skidmore, Owing and Merrill in San Francisco, where she primarily contributed towards mixed-use planning and transportation-oriented urban projects. Her work experience varies greatly, from detailed architectural design projects to large-scale planning efforts throughout India, China, Malaysia, and the US. And Fabrizio worked for about 5 years in two preeminent design and planning firms in Paris, where he addressed sustainability and mobility issues in transit-oriented development and eco-districts, and in France and internationally. And we're very happy to have them both, and I'd like to pass off the controls to them right now. Guys? Hello, Fabrizio and Ankita, can you hear us?
Hi, Matt. Yeah, sorry, we were in mute.
Ah, okay.
So, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us from all the different places around the world. And thanks, Matt and Island Press, for hosting this webinar. I'm now going to present Sky Duncan, which is our director here at the Global Design in Cities Initiative at the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Sky Duncan has been leading a multi-year program funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies to develop the new Global Street Design Guide and to provide technical assistance to cities around the world on safe and sustainable street design. Sky is an urban designer with over a decade of experience in architecture, urban design, planning, and landscape architecture, and spent 7 years working as a senior urban designer at the New York City Department of City Planning in their Office of Chief Urban Designer. I'm going to now pass it over to Sky, and she's going to present the Global Street Design Guide.
Fabulous. Thanks, Fabrizio, and again to Matthew for hosting us today for this exciting day. We're really thrilled to be here and to share some of the lessons that we've been working on the last few years on this exciting project. And what we often talk about is how we can change streets to change the world. And a big part of what we're hoping to help communities around the world is to really look back and see the potential of how do we transform our streets. How do we, and I'll just see if I can, sorry, make sure I can get the slides working. How do we restore the role of the street as the lifeblood of our communities that they once were? And as our largest continuous network of public open space in our cities, you know, we've really been doing a pretty bad job in many contexts, and so it's time to make better and more efficient use of this space. Now, of course, if we think of our streets, there's many lenses through which we can approach and design and think about them, from mobility and access, right? Our streets help us get around our cities and access our jobs and our schools every day. The environmental sustainability, the decisions we make around our street designs impact the air that we breathe, how our water is managed, and our overall ecosystems. The economic sustainability, our streets help our businesses flourish and function, the delivery of goods. The fact that we almost all step on streets every single day reminds us the role and the power of streets to really impact our overall livability and quality of life. But the lens that we want to talk about today primarily is through public health and safety. And this is because of this very scary and critical number that 1.25 million people die on our streets every single year around the world. That's the equivalent of around one person every 30 seconds. And a big part of this is because we have created environments in our cities that have forgotten that our human beings are at the heart of our cities. We've created spaces like this where we've forgotten to even create safe spaces for pedestrians, where our most vulnerable users have to risk their life every day to go to work or to go to school. We see horrible samples where people in a wheelchair with no protection have to share a space because they don't have safe sidewalks, with large metal boxes moving at fast speeds. And environments where we're making our elderly people and our young children having to walk 6 or 7 times as far just across the street. So, you know, the wonderful thing is, while we've got a lot of challenging environments around the world, we've also got many great examples we can look to and learn from, to copy and share, whether it's from Melbourne in Australia, examples in Sao Paulo in Brazil, redesigning intersections to prioritize pedestrians. Examples in Helsinki in Finland, where large, wide sidewalks invite entire families to be able to comfortably move through the centre of their city. Shared streets in Auckland, where the pedestrian is king and cars are invited to use the space, but at slow speeds, where they're aware of everybody around them. Or examples where pedestrian-only streets, like this one in Bandung in Indonesia, create spaces where people don't have to deal with conflicts with vehicles, or Bogota in Colombia. And our latest installation, which I'll tell you a bit more about, in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And this idea of looking to some of the best projects in the world and to try and share and borrow and steal as many ideas as we can and to avoid making the same mistake is a big part of what we're doing at the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety. Some of you may know that in 2014, Michael Bloomberg committed $125 million towards combating global road safety as part of a 5-year program. And we're really working, there's 4 primary areas. There's global experts working in enforcement, those looking at data and improving what's out there so we know who's dying and where and why. Media campaigns that help people to understand to wear their seatbelts and their helmets and not to drink or drive or speed. But our role as part of this team, as part of the Safe Streets and Safe Mobility work, where we're partnering with the World Resources Institute Embark and the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility, to look at the physical infrastructure of our cities and to look at the decisions we make around that and how that impacts the behavior of people using the street. So the first part of the grant for us was to produce a global street design guide, which I'm going to give you some insight to today, a quick overview. And then we've started in 2016 giving technical assistance to cities Sao Paulo in Brazil, Bogota in Colombia, and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and we'll be taking on a couple more cities next year to really look at how do we start to apply a lot of these strategies into place. But the guide itself has 3 primary sections, and I'm going to move very quickly through this just to give people a sense of what's in there, and hopefully you find the time to have a look in more detail. But we really start by looking at the big picture of about streets, how do we define them, the processes of shaping them, and looking at measuring and evaluating streets. Then we look at the design guidance, how we have core principles, and how we design for place and for people. And then some of the more technical details around utilities and infrastructure, operational and management strategies, and design controls, so the more engineering side of this. And then a huge part of the book is through street transformations based on a before and after of both streets and intersection typologies. And our goal is to really complement the many documents that already exist out there in the world to try and help provide resources to help support the Sustainable Development Goals that are out there. In particular, number 3, to halve the number of global deaths from traffic crashes by the year 2020, just around the corner. And of course, number 11, to provide safe and affordable, accessible, sustainable transportation options by 2030. And as we shift from the global agenda to local action, our idea is that we really want to inspire leaders to be able to provide enough technical detail to inform practitioners, but also to empower communities to know what they can ask for and demand of their streets and their cities. And we're taking the hierarchical pyramid that has existed for too many decades in too many places, where the car has been king and people have almost been completely forgotten, and inverting this so that our pedestrians, our most vulnerable users, are now at the top of the hierarchy. Then we prioritize sustainable mobility, like sustainable collective transportation and cycling, making sure we allow for moving goods and city services, and then when we have space, allowing for the private vehicle. And we haven't done this on our own. Many of you on this call are from contexts that have helped us create this global expert network where we've had representation from over 40 countries and 70 cities to support and collect best practices and to put these together. And a big part of what we're trying to do is to ask people to question what is possible of their context. It's fundamental that we get new street designs right, but as our cities grow, the large portion of our existing context already exists today. So if we don't go back and ask what is possible and how we can transform those spaces, we are going to be in serious trouble. So the Global Street Design Guide takes a new approach, shifting away from functional classification where we only get to pick if a street is an arterial, a local, or a connector, and instead takes a people and place first approach to street design. And we demand that every street design focuses on the desirable outcomes, that we proactively create environments that support health and safety, livability and quality of life, access for all modes of transportation, environmental and economic sustainability, and of course that this is done in a fair and equitable way. Now we have 10 primary design principles, starting with the fact that our streets are must be for our most vulnerable, that they're safe and they support healthy environments, as I mentioned. Reminding ourselves that our streets are public space. That means they belong to all of us and we all have a right to be there. That our streets are a fundamental part of our local ecosystems, that they're multimodal, that our streets make sense for the context that they move through. We know that great streets are great for business, and we've seen more and more evidence of this over recent years. We remind ourselves that our streets are not two-dimensional. We don't experience them in plan or section like we often draw them, but they're multi-dimensional. We as human beings experience them in time, in space, with all of our human senses. And our favorite one of all, which is the fact that our streets can change and that we all must take action now to start to change them. Now, when we talk about designing for people, we really start by understanding what are the needs of all of the different users, from the pedestrians to the cyclists, for those using collective transportation in our cities, those using personal motor vehicles, moving goods and city services, and of course, how our streets support the needs of our businesses. And when we look at these different users in our streets and we understand that they each take up a different amount of space, we've all seen versions of this diagram where to move 50 people, we see how much space of our street that we take up. So as our streets grow and change, we have to make decisions. Do we want to move our people like this, or do we want to move them in a multimodal approach? And one of the examples that we show in the guide really touches on the efficiency of the use of space. We see how the very same space designed as a car-centric design moves around 12,000 people, but designing that same space in a multimodal approach allows us to move 2.5 times as many people. So I'll skim through some of the needs of our users, but each of them touch on the scale and the size of the different users. And then, of course, we touch on the overall network scale so that we make sure that we're not doing this in a piecemeal approach, but that our networks are safe and connected and comprehensive for each of the users. And then we also go into some of the details and dimensions of the basic facility geometries for each of those users. So whether it's the sidewalk, the cycle path, the transit lane, and so forth. And of course, it's not just those basic facilities, but a whole toolkit of elements that the Global Street Design Guide provides to help support a comprehensive and enjoyable experience for each of these users. We also touch on the rest of the pedestrian infrastructure, whether it's crossings, looking at pedestrian refuge islands, or different strategies towards sidewalk extensions. Now, when we talk about place, it's of course not only important to think of the built environment, but the natural environment, the local social and cultural context that makes each of our street designs look and feel in a different way depending on which part of the world we're in, and of course the economic environment that we're working in. And we have a series of principles and considerations both for the regional context, so that looking at the larger scale, we make sure we're taking into consideration everything from demographics to density, the larger connectivity of our street networks and block sizes, down to the local geographic features and considerations of natural climate and natural disasters. At the immediate context, we really look at the consideration of the more specific street activity, where the furniture goes, how we support a human scale, that the edges of our buildings that line our streets have regular entrances and transparency to keep things active and safe, and that we find ways to incorporate green infrastructure and consider our local climate. And a big part of when we think about our context, we have to remind ourselves that it changes, that we can't just do one street design for an entire corridor, but that at one point the needs of a street may be resulting in the condition where it's a neighborhood main street. But a few blocks down the road, that same street has a new transit line coming in. The density is higher, and so the needs and the decisions around design must change. And that same corridor in this example, then when we get into a dense urban environment, looks at actually removing vehicles altogether to prioritize sustainable transport and pedestrians. So when we look at the street transformations, there's obviously almost infinite number of street typologies, but we came up with 5 core typologies to work on, from pedestrian priority streets, shared streets, neighborhood streets, large streets, and then what we call special conditions, the things that don't fit in any other category. And for each of these, we've adapted global examples and abstracted them into 3D models where we can show a before and after. So a street like this, we show how it can be transformed into a space like this that adds more value to the community by prioritizing pedestrians in this case. Examples which we're going to hear more about, like from Copenhagen in Denmark, where we've seen entire parts of this city centres that have been pedestrianised and had huge increases in volumes, increase in outdoor cafe seating and larger activities in terms of stopping and staying activities. Neighbourhood main streets, examples like this that can be transformed to provide safe infrastructure for cyclists, incorporate green infrastructure and wider, safer sidewalks that local businesses can support. Examples like this from New York City, where we see similar strategies applied that have actually been shown to decrease injuries to all users, decrease pedestrian crashes, and actually decrease speeding while increasing retail sales. Smaller shared streets in commercial contexts like this that can be transformed. Examples similar to Auckland in New Zealand, where consumer spending went up, people felt safer, and the overall volumes of vehicles went down. And large grand streets, like this one, actually modelled off the other example we're going to hear from Buenos Aires today, where streets can be transformed to more efficiently and more effectively move more people throughout our cities, in this case by prioritising BRT systems and cycle infrastructure within the same right-of-way. And we're going to hear more from Juanco about some of the metrics related to this design. More and more we're seeing examples around the world where elevated structures are being removed and the space is being rethought so that no longer are these corridors, dividers between neighbourhoods, but instead connecting adjacent contexts together, like this example in Seoul in Korea, where pedestrian activity went up, bus ridership went up, and we had a huge improvement in the air quality. Streets to streams, increasingly we're seeing examples where our historical methodologies of paving over our streamways and our local waterways are now being rethought and revealed to again create spaces that connect our neighbourhoods together. Like this one in Paso Robles in the USA, where not only were the average speeds decreased, but new trees were planted and more water was treated in that same space. We do a similar thing with the intersection transformation, showing examples of small raised intersections and how these can be improved to slow speeds and prioritize our vulnerable users. Examples like this one in Fortaleza in Brazil in a mid-block context, or where slip lanes that invite cars to speed and move at fast speeds can be redesigned to provide protective areas for cyclists in that same space. Like this one, which is from an example from India, just done as a temporary measure. And one of our favorites is public plazas. As our streets connect each other at odd geometries and angles, spaces to store cars can be transformed into places for people. And we see examples that, again, we draw from Sao Paulo, from Buenos Aires in Argentina, and right here in New York City, where car parks are turned into plazas. And one of the most famous examples of Times Square, where our pedestrian volumes went up, our ridership went up, people preferred the space, and we had an overall reduction in crashes and an improvement in air quality. So there's over 20 case studies from all around the world in the Global Guide. This is just a small taste. And one thing I just wanted to mention very briefly is that a big part of this is also looking at the process and metrics. So for cities to help understand what their existing process for designing streets are, and the Global Street Design Guide helps from engaging stakeholders and analyzing sites to project implementation, to collecting metrics, how we evaluate the impacts of our design, and updating overall policy. To look at who are the different stakeholders we have to get to the table and ask what they care about and what their interests are in terms of getting the right type of design on the street. And when we think about how we measure and evaluate our streets, the Global Street Design Guide has 3 primary areas. From the overall physical and operational changes, whether it's new sidewalk or cycle facility that's being added or improved signal timing, to the number of trees, and then how these physical changes impact a shift in use and activity. Does adding more cycle facilities result in more cyclists? Does the green infrastructure result in more water being able to be treated? And the long-term impacts of road safety and air quality also being a long-term measure at a different scale. And the Global Guide touches a bit on the what and the when and the why and the how of how we go about making these measurements. We're also in the process of collecting and developing metrics forms that we will end up putting on our website so that cities around the world can download these and start measuring your own impacts of street designs in your context. So to give you a tiny taste of the work in the 3 cities that we've been doing, we're now taking this work and looking at how we can use this to inform policy and design guidance, how we can offer trainings and build capacity in each of these local contexts through traditional workshops or more interactive and engaging workshops, community engagement sessions where we learn from the local experts of where they feel safe and how they feel about their local context, and how we can help them apply these strategies to their local neighborhoods. We've been doing one-day pop-up transformations like this one in Sao Paulo, or in Addis Ababa, where we go out and with nothing more than chalk and planters show people what's possible and allow them to see and feel a different use of their streets. These short-term pop-up events like this one in Bogota, we see a car park on the left through a pop-up event eventually being transformed with paint and planters, not just for one day but for multiple months at a time. And we just got back this past week from Addis Ababa where we did the same thing and redesigned an intersection here with a local art school and the local city officials. So we're measuring all of this, we're using these forms to collect metrics and evaluation, and we're starting to process this so people can understand what these metrics mean and how these designs can impact a better city. So we officially launched the book last month in Quito, which was very exciting, and we're now in the process of launching an endorsement campaign for the guide for both cities and organizations, so please let us know if you're interested. We've been very fortunate to have advanced praise from some of the wonderful leaders of this work in the world, and recently also just with many of the various mayors showing their support for the Global Street Design Guide, so this is just the beginning. And we hope that this new resource provides the tools to help you reimagine and reinvent and redesign safer and more sustainable streets in your context. So our challenge to you is to write about it, to ask for it, to demand it, to design it. Hopefully maybe some of you have the money to fund it, and to ultimately just do it, to fight for streets that put people first. And collectively we can work together by changing streets to change the world. Thanks so much, Matthew. I'll stop there, and I encourage you all to sign up to stay involved in our ongoing work around the Global Street Design Guide. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sky. As Matt said earlier, we encourage all our participants to send in their questions. We'll be, of course, moderating them towards the end of the session. But I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Juanjo Mendez, who's the Secretary of Transportation for City of Buenos Aires. With previous experience as an entrepreneur, he began working in the public sector in 2010 as the Chief of Staff of Transit and Transportation. He was part of the team that implemented the Sustainable Mobility Plan, and he received the Sustainable Transportation Award in 2014. The plan's main objective included incentivizing the use of public transportation, promoting healthy mobility ways, and reducing road crashes through the development of infrastructure, technology, and education. And without further ado, Juanjo, please please take over and present some amazing work that you've been doing in the city of Buenos Aires, including the case study that Sky briefly mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you also to Sky, Fabricio, and Matt for putting together this webinar that it is an amazing opportunity to share and exchange what we are doing from different cities and to learn from each other and keep improving our cities as we've been talking. Well, what I'm talking about is about Metrobus. We started with the BRT in Buenos Aires in 2011 with the first corridor in Juan B. Justo Avenue, and in 2013 we achieved the milestone of introducing the BRT in 9 de Julio Avenue, which is the picture you are seeing in the background. And we start from our perspective in the transportation department at the city of Buenos Aires. We want to be part of the process of becoming Buenos Aires an enjoyable city, and we know that with transportation we have one of the most important tools to fulfill that objective. We want to have a connected city that promotes sustainable public transportation, but mostly prioritizing pedestrians and cycling. And this is a quick introduction on how the people move in the city of Buenos Aires. We have 8 million trips every day inside the boundaries of the city of Buenos Aires, with 3 million inhabitants and with other 3 million visitors that come from the outskirts of the city of Buenos Aires. Inside the city of Buenos Aires, 84% of the trips are made by some type of public transportation, where buses are almost 60% of the trips. Buses is the most important mode in the city of Buenos Aires. And the 3 million visitors we receive every day commuting into the city, 55% of them do that by mass transit and 45% of them by car. This is our biggest challenge. We are working together with the federal government to reduce that number, to increase the level of service of the mass transit, mostly train, the commuter rail network in the city of Buenos Aires, in order to decrease the number of car riders. As you can see, this is 9 de Julio Avenue before and after. What you're seeing is how we convert an avenue that it was recognized by our neighbors and our citizens as a monument for the cars. We were very proud to have the widest avenue in the world, as we call it, the 9 de Julio Avenue. And when we started with this project, we faced a lot of opposition. At the beginning, from car drivers, but then from bus operators, passengers, everyone was complaining about this project and the outcomes, and that we were going to change the landscape of the city for worse, and so many reasons to be against any type of change that can arise in any society. We faced all of them. But finally, what we introduced was the concept of we have to redesign and redistribute the way we use the public space. And having in mind that 2/3 of population moving in 9 de Julio Avenue was mass transit riders, mainly bus riders, we redesigned the avenue and we created a specific 1/3 of the public space of the avenue dedicated with fully segregation for the bus system, creating this BRT corridor that allowed us to decrease the travel time over 60%, and as Sky mentioned, also great improvements in road safety, also in the quality of public space. As you can see in the picture, we create a real green corridor in terms that the avenue has now more trees than it used to have in the past. It has 550 new trees in the corridor. This is Buenos Aires 8 years ago when we started with this challenge, and this is Buenos Aires today, a more pedestrian-friendly city, This is the area, as you can see, 9 de Julio Avenue and downtown area. We started with the redevelopment of this area, and the BRT 9 de Julio was part of this project. We needed to take away bus routes running from these narrow streets and to move them to the 9 de Julio and add them to the existing bus routes running in 9 de Julio Avenue. This process allowed us to decrease the number of, to increase the pedestrian and cyclist priority to 90% of the streets in this area and decrease the number of vehicles 75%. We started this process in 2011, and you can see the results by 2013 and 2016. This is the way this narrow street used to be. This is a picture of my pool street in the downtown area. We used to have over 60 buses per hour running in this street with very narrow sidewalks, people waiting for, jumping into a bus, and people walking, and with very poor road safety conditions. And this is how the narrow streets of the downtown area are today, with bike riders, pedestrians, mixed also with cars, but running at very low speed, 10 kilometers per hour, and with a lot of restrictions in terms of the times of the day where they can get in or get around the downtown area. This is right across the downtown area is a judicial neighborhood, which we are starting to redevelop right now, also following the same concepts we used in the downtown area. And this is how we are going to increase the pedestrian friendly or the car restricted areas of the city of Buenos Aires. When we introduced 9 de Julio, we set a restriction in this area where cars from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. they wouldn't allow to get into this area. We are now passing a bill at the local legislative body of the city in order to increase the area to this perimeter, and by February 2018 also add this perimeter, and by July 2018 to increase the restriction from 9 hours, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And by 2020 also adding this neighborhood in the southern part of the historical district. With these restrictions, what we are doing is right now investing a lot of money in improving mass transit. We already have the BRT 9 de Julio, but we are now building a new BRT corridor in this avenue, which is going to complete the BRT, the mass transit system in the area. Also, this area has 5 subway lanes serving the whole area, plus the commuter rails that are, which their commuter stations are located here and a few miles here from the downtown area. These are some results of the Metrobus in 9 de Julio. We time saved in every trip over 50%. The amount of CO2 emissions also saved every year, and the number of passengers benefited by this intervention. One of the biggest challenges of the introduction of BRT in 9 de Julio was the stakeholders, mainly private vehicle drivers, bus companies, cyclists, and neighbors. Finally, the main stakeholder is the pedestrian and the bus rider. They were the first to buy the idea and to push for this project, and then we start working with the rest of the stakeholders to have them on board. Clearly, conditions for private vehicles remains the same, and in the past they suffer congestion. They even have some more specific problems, like they lose some intersections that they were able to turn right, and U-turns, they lose this type of benefits. But even though that, they recognize that the avenue, it's a more fair avenue. That's the way people here in the city recognize this project and what we did in the avenue. The concept of the redistribution of public space in terms of who are the real users and how to do it in a sustainable way gain a lot of attention in the mass media here in Buenos Aires city, and that helped us to be the case with the rest of the stakeholders like private car drivers. And this is the way we've been intervening in intersections in the downtown area. Also, this is a very interesting project. What you're seeing here, it used to be a former underground parking lot for 450 cars, which was converted into a minibus terminal. Minibuses bring every day over 100,000 passengers into the city center. This minibus terminal operates with 50,000 passengers per day. So we converted an infrastructure dedicated for cars, an infrastructure fully dedicated for mass transit, for people riding in these minibuses. These are the short use streets of the downtown area, how they look today, how it used to be, you know, the accessibility to mass transit 3 years ago and how it is today, which is fully accessible. And also, we changed the mindset of our neighbors and citizens in terms of they have to respect new maximum speed of 10 kilometers per hour. We took away a lot of parking, on-street parking spaces, and we even redesigned the operation scheme for logistics in the downtown area. This successful case is helping us to take these good habits or good changes to other neighborhoods around the city. This is a great picture to see how is people enjoying the public space today in the city of Buenos Aires, and how we finally are achieving the goal of a more sustainable city, or as Sky mentioned, a more livable city for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Guaco, and thank you for showing these amazing projects. We're looking forward to hearing more and more projects like that in Buenos Aires and also around the world. Hopefully this project will inspire other cities around the world. And I'm now going to present the third presenter today, Andreas Roll from Guild People. Andreas has an extensive experience creating efficient urban transport systems with a consistent focus on transport as a means to creating livable cities. He has worked at both national and city level and has acted as transport consultant for cities including Vancouver and Copenhagen. His 7-year position as director of the bicycle program of the city of Copenhagen has provided Andreas with unique insights into delivering on high-profile political agendas as well as promoting cycling in urban areas via both hard and soft infrastructure. Andreas is going to present today another case study of the Global Street Design Guide. It's going to be the street of Stroget in Copenhagen, a pedestrian-only street in the heart of the city of Copenhagen. It's a pedestrianization process that lasted over 50 years and was aiming to give back streets to people. Now passing it over to Andreas.
Yes, hello, it's Andreas. Also, again, me also, thank you for inviting me to take part of this. Also, regards from my CEO, Helle Søholt, who was involved in some of the work on the Global Street Design Guide. Yes, I've been asked to present the case of Strøget, which was the first walking street in the city of Copenhagen. I think it's used as a case in the book also because it was one of the first of these kind of more modern walking streets that was also observed from the very beginning. Actually, this was one of the very, very first urban projects that Jan Gehl did follow, and also where he observed the discussion both before and after the implementation of this project, which was implemented almost 55 years ago in the city of Copenhagen. I think the discussion back then, before the decision on Strøget, was very similar to the discussions we both at Gehl Architects and also in many, many other cities experience when we are discussing how to prioritize space in our cities, and if we want to prioritize more space for people than for cars. Also in Copenhagen, the discussion was this cannot be done. The shops will die. The climate here in Denmark is very warm. Nobody will want to be outside. It is not the Danish culture to walk along a street. That is maybe only in Italy and such places. So that was how the discussion was also 55 years ago. What then happened was that actually this walking street was implemented, and it was a big success almost from the moment it started. We see in the summer around 80,000 people a day on the street, and the increase in pedestrians on this street was close to 35% just from kind of almost just after it was opened. That number has been pretty steady, probably because the street is running very close to maximum capacity on the busy days, so there's simply not room for any more pedestrians on this street. Also other signs of use were suddenly we saw a lot of baby strollers on this street because of much better accessibility, much better space. So you can measure the effect of the street in many ways. And also the shops had a great time. And even when it was raining, the Copenhageners still did use the street. So this it was not, for the Danish climate, turned out not to be completely true. So sometimes it's mentioned that this was like the first walking street in Europe or something like that, but that is a misunderstanding. In Copenhagen back then, we had the inspiration from cities such as Rotterdam and several German cities, where after the Second World War, some of these cities were rebuilt with a main street where cars were not allowed. So actually Copenhagen was not a first mover here, but had inspiration from other cities again, such as Rotterdam and cities in Germany. It was also interesting for me, I spoke with Jan Gehl before doing this presentation, and now when Gehl Architects work in other cities, we often use this methods where we maybe do a temporary project and we learn from that, we refine it, we make it permanent. Also, a lot of the other projects, examples mentioned before me, were based on this pretty quick method of implementing, where you do something with pretty simple means, and then maybe you learn from that, you refine, and maybe also you upgrade it and make it more permanent. Actually, what they did in Copenhagen 55 years ago was pretty similar to this. The Strøget walking street first started as a very short period where it was closed for motor vehicle traffic just in the weeks leading up to Christmas, where shopping was especially busy. But then early in the new year, there was a political decision on prolonging this experiment of having a purely walking street. And then that was evaluated, and a half year later, there was a political decision to permanently converting Strøget to a pedestrian-only street. So this about test, learn, refine is not exactly a new idea, but I think also with the experience we have nowadays at Gehl, it seems to be a very good method of also doing these more controversial projects, and also makes it possible to act pretty fast, because things does not have to be that fancy when you start. What happened in Copenhagen was also very much that Strøget started at a trend. Since then, the city has very much been converted from a city that was kind of under threat from a car invasion to a city with much more focus on public space. We have eliminated a lot of the parking in the downtown area and also along the waterfront, as these pictures illustrated. Again, this was very much based also on this example of Strøget, the walking street, and that being a success. And we have seen a steady increase of the space that was either totally car-free or very, very traffic-count, as these maps illustrates. And when we saw this, obviously, that also in Copenhagen now, we see much more people who spend time in the city. And as Jan Gehl said to me when we spoke about this case, back in the 60s, when you ask people in the city, so why are you here? They say, I'm here to go shopping. But now when you ask people in the city center in Copenhagen, so why are you here? They say, I'm here to be in the city. So you do much more than shopping. It's much more an experience of being in kind of the public space and being part of public life that attracts people to the city center now, where you also can do shopping in many, many other ways. What also we've seen in Copenhagen is that we've been lucky that this focus on good public space, public life, walking, cycling has spread out, so it's not just an inner city phenomenon anymore. Now it's very much also spreading out to the residential areas around the city center, as these pictures illustrates. One of the ways you can measure successes of these kind of projects is who's actually in the public space. These are just some examples. What is the public space used for? Showing the number of cafe chairs in the inner city and also the number of parking spaces for cars, and how these trends have been kind of going the opposite way. And also illustrates again the importance of very much also working with a parking program, having a strategy for car parking as part of these projects, and this focus on creating better public spaces, better conditions for people in the cities. Car parking is there a very, very crucial issue to work with strategically. A lot of other numbers research was done on this case. This is just how people were using the city throughout the day. We saw more public life in the evening. And I think in general, as this quote from one of the former mayors of the city, that to have these public life studies, these kind of numbers on things that were not before counted, has been very, very important for the development of the city of Copenhagen. And this was very much due to the research done by Jan Gehl since the 60s. And now you can say in Copenhagen, we're lucky that the city has very much kind of taken this methodology as part of their work. And for example, now the city is doing a biannually public life study. So you can follow not just the development in number of cars, but also in a lot of other indicators of how is the city doing, also when it comes to public life and design for people. Just yet another example of how it's about working with numbers. This is from when I worked at the city of Copenhagen, where also we did quite a lot of research into so how do people actually go shopping, because this discussion on what happens with shops when you convert space for cars to space for walking or cycling or public space is also in Copenhagen still a very important discussion and sometimes quite heated discussion. So to have numbers like this that shows so what modes of transport are actually producing what proportion of the turnover in shops. It's just one example of documentation in Copenhagen, and I think as well in many other cities is important for the kind of for the foundation for political discussions. And of course, it was nice to see in Copenhagen that actually people arriving on bikes, they actually spend more money in shops than people arriving in cars. Yeah, just a quote from somebody at a supermarket saying that these numbers actually matters. I think this gradual development in Copenhagen kind of started with one walking street, the case I'm speaking about today, but now the city of Copenhagen and many other cities are at a point where this about being a livable city, a city with good urban space for people, is a specific part of the vision. And that is also where, before I joined Gehl Architects, but Gehl Architects played an important role in being a very important part of doing this vision for the city of Copenhagen called a metropolis for people. So having a strong vision on this topic also seems to make a lot of sense. Today, there is sometimes quite a lot of discussion on, so how is Strøget working today? Because what we see in Copenhagen is again, in many other cities, Strøget is so popular maybe now the locals is not using it that much. We have a discussion, is it too cheap shops, too touristic at one end, and at the other end, is it too mainstream? You have a lot of these high-end luxury brands. So that's one discussion. Should it be like that? Is that just a street you have in a city, or should it be done anything about it? Ongoing discussion. But another trend in Copenhagen, as in many other places, is of course is about Copenhageners, local shops. They move to parallel streets, or they move to main streets in kind of more residential neighborhoods close to the city center, where we see a lot of very positive development going on, which is maybe even more interesting to observe these years. One example is just this Strædet, which is a parallel street to Strøget, where instead of being completely car-free, it's a shared space solution that works quite well on that street. You can go in a car if you go slow, you can go on your bike, but you know, if you go there on a Saturday in the Christmas time, there is a lot of people walking there, so it's not a place you go if you're in a hurry and it's on bike. There you need to go on another street, but it's also good facilities to cycle, you can go fast. So also in Copenhagen we see a lot of these kind of different combinations of how can you traffic calm streets and public spaces. But again, very much building on the initial success of Strøget. So it was again interesting for me to research for this, and yeah, I came to think for the people that took the decision back then 55 years ago. That was a very important decision for Copenhagen, even though all the kind of these arguments we also discuss now was very heated back then. It would never work, the shops will die and so on. But luckily it worked well, it worked out in Copenhagen, and we have learned and built on that for around 55 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anders. This was great, very inspiring, of course. And we've got some questions from our audience. The first one is for the transformation in Sao Paulo, and I would revert that to Sky. The question is, how long did it take from conceptual design to plan to design and to implementation for the transformation in Sao Paulo?
Thanks, Sankita, and thank you to Andres and Juanco. Amazingly inspiring projects and presentations from you both, and we were, really so excited to be able to showcase your work in the Global Street Design Guide, among many others. For the Sao Paulo project that we were working on, it's actually part of a larger, what's called like a reduced speed zone, or a zone 40 in the case of Sao Paulo, where there's a whole series of interventions that are being proposed to make the whole neighborhood safer. One of which is to remove the cars from the main transit corridor to make a transit street that prioritizes buses and pedestrians. At the moment the sidewalks are literally just over 1 meter and completely obstructed, and that's just 1 block away from the plaza or the roundabout Getulio Vargas, which is the image that we showed you there. So in planning, this has been part of a much larger process that's been in the works for a number of months of this year. But when we decided to do the interim intervention, the pop-up for the one-day event, we really probably pulled everything together in about just over 2 weeks. We kind of had an amazing team of embedded staff in Sao Paulo who kind of pulled together and started to get, the materials available and get the right permissions from the right city agencies. We had the CAD drawing, and then in terms of actual physical implementation, we got up at some ungodly hour, like 3 a.m., and went out there and started painting by about 4:30 with the chalk, and literally just with buckets of gypsum and rollers and paintbrushes, and we had a whole team of people, probably about 20 people on the ground helping on the day to do the painting, and then we did that probably for about 5 hours, and then the event opened at 5, and then we had bands and music and activities for kids. So it was a one-day thing, but it's quite incredible to show what you can pull together in a matter of a couple of weeks when you have people working together to really do some great transformations. And I should note that we're also collecting metrics for before and after. So we were, you know, measuring speed and counting pedestrians and so forth of the day that it was closed, as well as user surveys to understand if people preferred the space and would they like to see this done in a permanent way.
So I have a question that can be addressed to both Juanjo and Andreas. I think somebody from the team of Juanjo will respond to this question on the chat. And so I'm going to address the question to Andreas. It's about metrics, and the question comes from John Portfield. It's like, how do metrics for walkability inform the selection of a street to be a pedestrian street or a walking street?
I think within the city of Copenhagen, it's been mainly it's been, so how is the local context of the street? What kind of functions does it have? How does the residents use it? How does people visiting the city use it? And then also it has always been linked into like an overall strategy for the street hierarchy in the city. So you have kind of a long-term vision for what kind of roles will which streets, which public spaces have in the future. So you also look into that matter before you make your decision.
Okay, thank you.
I think the next question is again for the Global Street Design Guide. We have someone asking if the guide's getting translated into other languages and if there's a way to make this free to practitioners in other places. Maybe Sky, if you can answer this question.
Sure, thanks Ankita. Well, actually, funnily you should ask. So we're in the process at the moment. We just received the first chapter of the guide being translated into Portuguese. So we're working with the city of São Paulo to do this and our team on the ground there. So that hopefully next year will be something that will be able to be published. By the end of this year, the plan is to finish the translation process and start the proofreading. We're actually also working with the city of Bogota in Colombia to translate the guide into Spanish, and so that will also is on our agenda and work plan for next year. And while we've had a lot of conversations in passing and everything from Polish to Russian to Chinese and Mandarin, we haven't formally done anything other than those two at this point. And what we are doing is, now that we've had a little bit of a rest after we did the mammoth task of doing the physical book launch in Quito, is we're now in the process of putting all of the material onto a website. So for those of you who know the other NACTO guides like the Bikeway or the Urban Street Design Guide, all of the content, it won't be like a downloadable PDF, but all of the same content will be on the NACTO GDCI website. At this point, we're hoping by sometime in February, towards the end of February next year, that will be available.
Thank you, Sky. I'm gonna I want to put together a couple of questions that I'm going to ask first to Andreas, and after, if Sky want to jump in. One, it's a bit provocative question about like where the cars went after the pedestrianization of Stroget and in general, and when the streets are pedestrianized. And the other question is about including people that do business in street transformation. What are the main policies and design that can be inclusive of people doing business?
Should I start or?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Please, thanks.
Okay. I think tomorrow here at Gale Architects, I'm hosting a little celebration. And the reason for that is when Jan Gale started measuring, and the city of Copenhagen started measuring how many cars and how many bikes that came to the city center that crossed kind of the perimeter to the city center of Copenhagen 50 years ago. There was many more cars than bikes. But in fact, this very autumn, for the first time in these September counts, we had more bicycles than cars going to the city center in Copenhagen. So you could say a lot of the cars has kind of been exchanged by other modes, that being public transport, but also to a very high degree bicycles within the city of Copenhagen. So that is the main thing. Where did the cars go? That now people arrive at these areas by other modes than cars. One thing due to the redesign of the streets, but also due to improvement of alternative modes to the car, and also having a pretty tight car parking policy in these areas. When it comes to, if the question was on how to kind of involve stakeholders, including businesses, I think in Copenhagen, both when I was working at the City of Copenhagen before, but also inspired by some of Gale Architects' experiences from elsewhere, is this can be done in several ways, but you can never communicate too much and too early about these kind of projects. We have also had some less good experiences in Copenhagen. That sometimes happened if we were too busy communicating what we were going to do with the street, kind of the design details, and kind of forgot to keep telling the story on why are we doing this. So what is the vision with this? What is the reason with this? And then also being honest and knowing that even though the overall result of this might be positive businesses, might be positive for the city, that doesn't change the fact that some specific shops, some specific business owners will be hit by this if you change the street, because maybe their customers do need, or to a high degree need, a car to carry whatever they buy from there. So where the cities are looking at kind of a macro level, then of course as a business owner you're looking at your own shop. And I think also it's important for cities when you do this kind of stuff that really respect the citizens and also the business owners, because that can happen a lot for once the individual business owner, even though the overall effect of the project is positive, also on the parameter of, for example, how the shop's doing.
Great, thanks, Andreas. I can jump in from our perspective. You know, we've touched on this both in the earlier NACTA work in the Urban Street Design Guide and in the Global Street Design Guide. For those of you who happen to have a hard copy already in front of you, on page 181 is where we touch on design year and modal capacity. And, you know, for many years, what happened was people saw congestion and they thought, well, if we make wider streets and bigger streets and we add travel lanes, then we're going to create more space for the cars. But we've learned now that this is actually not the solution. And I think it's Lewis Mumford who gives the quote of, you know, adding travel lanes and more space is like adding another notch on your belt to deal with obesity. You know, it's not dealing with the actual problem. And we know that that space ultimately, you know, it may improve for a very brief period of time, but the space ends up filling up. But the opposite is true, and that's what, you know, we touch on. It's called either traffic evaporation or induced demand, where if we actually take space away from the private vehicle, what happens is people respond. So a percentage of people choose to then take a different mode. So instead of driving and parking there, they would either walk or bike or take public transit to that same destination. Another percentage of the drivers disappear essentially by taking an alternative route to get to their destination, and some don't take the trip at all. You know, they decide not to. So, you know, it's a number of ways we can think about how we get less cars on the road. But I think it's important that we can't just take space away. We have to do that in conjunction with improving the quality of the facilities and the safety for people walking, biking, and taking transit. So, you know, we as cities or as advocacy groups have to at the same time be advocating for improved facilities for the other users and the other modes that we're trying to promote. In terms of your second part of the question, Fabrizio, around people doing business and vendors, you know, again, this is something we touch on a little bit in the guide. It's within the users chapter, or what we call, you know, designing for people. So this is kind of around page 144. of the guide. And what we see, this is an issue that pops up in literally every city around the world. And you know, there's always entrepreneurs, there's always people wanting to sell business, sell goods, and there's always a demand, right? If people are standing in a hot climate, waiting at a bus stop, they are going to want a bottle of water, and the person who's going to sell it is going to sell it to them, or vice versa. So actually thinking about this at the outset, and rather than just saying, well, no, we don't want any vendors or any business, designing in through the decisions around the geometry of our street for these types of uses to happen, and to formalize them in a way that allow spaces in the street for vendors. So, you know, instead of a car parking space, why not have a couple of spots for some tables and chairs and a few vendors so that they don't have to block the sidewalk? You know, in contexts where there's a lot of restaurants and cafes like we just heard about in Copenhagen, making sure there's space for those businesses to spill out and use and claim some of that public space. So it's certainly something we're looking at around the world.
Thank you, Sky. There are a few more questions about the guide, so I'm just going to combine them to make it easier for us to answer. Here, the first is, what is the difference between the Global Street Design Guide and the regular Street Design Guide? This is a very common question. We've heard it a few times. The other one is if there's a possibility to create GSDG as an evolving document, which can be informed from new experiences and practices as they're implemented in the field of sustainable transportation. And the last question that I'd like to ask about the guide is if it helps cities that are more village-like or provincial and state routes, if this guide would be applicable to those kind of streets as well.
Okay, 3 great questions. Thanks, Ankita. Firstly, the difference between the USDG, or what's called the Urban Street Design Guide that NACDA released a few years ago, and the global one. So the global guide draws on many of the same principles, but really tries to take them to a global context. We have a much larger section on the users, or designing for people, as we say, where we give some of that basic geometry for each of those users. We also have a pretty solid structure of incorporating international case studies and their metrics in throughout the guide. So it's a bit bigger than the other books, obviously because we have to take into consideration a number of different contexts. And our street section, almost every single typology is around a before and after transformation, both for the intersections chapter and the street. So it's just a little more extensive in terms of the types of examples. You know, that USDG is very much based on contexts that are familiar for North American context, whereas we have a lot more of the kind of informal settlements, different modes of transportation like tuk-tuks and rickshaws, minibus transportation systems, a lot more vending. And so that's something we spend a lot of time trying to make sure it's applicable in the global version. In terms of having it as an evolving document, we certainly see already there's been a few editions of the Urban Street Design Guide, and we see the Global Street Design Guide as just the first version that's come out right now, and we hope to continue to hear from you guys about the great work you're doing. The network that we set up, the Global Expert Network, and the reason we have an option for people to sign up on our website is because our plan is to keep taking the case study model that we've started, but to continue to make these case studies in an online format. So, you know, a physical book, we were limited with 20 options for our case studies, or just over 20. Of course, online, we would love to be able to have a much broader set of case studies. So please do keep us posted and sign up and let us know about the great work you're doing. In terms of the more rural and state context, the Global Guide, you know, there are a lot of guides out there that I think right now really take into consideration those contexts, and we have taken a particular approach to urban contexts. You know, a lot of this is in reaction to the fact that the design guidance out there was typically for highways or rural or state roads that were being applied to urban contexts and cities where we actually want that as a place for people. So our priority of this document is urban areas, because that's where we found the deep need for this as a resource. But that's not to say that the same principles of putting people first and thinking about safe environments and prioritizing sustainable mobility options that doesn't make sense in all of these different contexts as well. So we hope it's still helpful, and we still believe it can inspire change in those contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. So we have a few other questions coming, and one it's still for you, Sky, but not about the guide. It's more about the work we are doing in the cities around the world. And so the question is, how do you involve the public to get acceptances on the projects you're doing around cities in the world?
Well, so it's quite fascinating, because I think every context that we work in, as you will know on this call, I'm sure, every place has a different process for community engagement and the way that they get buy-in and get people on board. So for us, we take it's not a single approach. We spend time in the communities that we're working in. We walk the streets and walk the sidewalks and cross the street and feel what it feels like for the speeding vehicles. We talk to the locals. We do questionnaires. We work with the capacity building for the local staff there, and we go where we can. We go out on site and we take the local engineers and we take the local communities, and through these kind of pop-up events and so forth, we try and help them see an alternative to what they know they currently have. We've been doing a number of community engagement workshops where, the step before we can go out and physically change the environment with chalk and planters, we get people around a table. We have all these puzzle pieces and toolkits where people can kind of vote with their stickers or vote with their moves that allow them to tell us what their priorities are and to tell us where they feel the least safe and the types of things they think make sense for their context. So we try and tackle it in a number of ways, but we do really see that the local folk are the experts in their context. So it's important that we understand what their concerns are, and we collect as many metrics as we can, and we use that to know when we're making a mistake, to know how to make the projects better in the longer term, and to help people understand the many, many benefits of these moves. And we see again and again when people go out and only count cars and only look at commute times, it's very easier for the media to pick up a story about how bad a project is. And part of our goal is by collecting and measuring other things that we can say, all right, well, maybe a commute time for someone in a private vehicle might be 2 minutes extra per day, but look how much more efficiently the public transit is working, and the number of people who can get to work on time will save 20 minutes or 30 minutes of their day, or how much safer the kids feel walking, or how much better the businesses are doing, or how much cleaner is the air. So really diversifying the conversation through bringing other considerations and benefits is a big part of what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Sky. We've got a few more questions about the guide, and again, I'm going to try and combine them. One of them is, if there's a way to incorporate the Global Street Design Guide principles into new developments involving big box stores and large parking lots and garages, is it possible to mitigate the effects of such a car-centric design that is already in development? And this is particularly in reference to strip malls or box stores. And the other question is, how applicable are these street design strategies and principles for small cities? We have Annika, who works in small island developing states, and she says that she doesn't often get to see relevant work that they've been doing in these small cities.
Absolutely. Transforming our kind of suburban context in our strip malls is a fundamental next step for changing how our cities work. And transportation and street design is going to certainly play a really key role in that, but it can't be done in isolation of land use and planning and density and mix of uses with our planning departments and our larger kind of development agencies in our cities. So, I encourage, wherever the question is coming from, that in your city you make sure as a starting point that mobility and transit is integrally tied with land use and density and zoning and planning of your city. Because, we could change it and make the best street and the ground plane, but if the edges, as we mentioned in the presentation, if the edges of the buildings aren't active and engaging and providing a space that people want to be, it's going to be much harder to do that. So they really have to be done in conjunction with each other. But yeah, street design will play a key role in that for sure. In terms of the smaller island states, I would say once again, in the guide we cover the transformation of streets, everything from around 7 or 8 meters up to 100 meters. And so we really try and touch on all the different scales so that there's something in there for everyone, so that everybody's able to see in there something they can take to inspire their local context and put a picture in front of someone's face and say, look, this is what's possible, this is what we could do here. So it's, there's infinite number of examples. We have a lot in the book, but we also up front in the guide explain to people that this is about taking the core principles and looking, as we said, about the people and place needs of each of the street designs themselves, and to make that context and the needs of the people who use it to inform the design decisions around the streets. In terms of, we had a lot of questions around is this guide applicable to new developments and not just transformations? And the answer is yes, absolutely. What we say up front in the guide is that while it's based off a transformation model of before and after, the after is certainly a condition that could be used as a baseline for any new development. So please use it as you can for new streets, but also to ask what's possible and how to transform existing streets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sky. I think we touched most, if not all, the questions that we received from the participant of this webinar. I don't know if either the panelists or Ankita has any other questions. Otherwise, we're going to thank you all the panelists, Juanjo and Andreas, for participating to this webinar. Thank you so much, Matthew, for organizing and hosting this webinar. Please, so this webinar has been recorded. It will be available on the GDCI website as well as the IP and the Island Press website. If you have any other questions and you want to contact us, please use the information that you can find on our website. Our email is global@nacto.org, and we'll be happy to respond to any other question that you guys have about the guide and the work that we're doing around the world.
Thanks, Fabrizio. And one last pledge, please keep us posted with the great work you're all doing. We know we've barely scratched the surface with the work we're touching on here, and we would love to help spread the word through this network, through GDCI and NACTO, about the great work you're doing. So please do keep us informed. Thanks so much for this opportunity, Matthew and Island Press.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. And just a reminder, you can pick up the book for 20% off at islandpress.org using the promo code 2NACTO. So thanks for everyone who is on the call. This is Matt from Island Press. I'll see you next time. Thanks.